All right, is everybody ready to get started? Call this meeting to order. Fantastic. I think we've got a little bit of logistics to handle due to the pandemic and the method under which we're going to be handling this meeting. Obviously, we are under a state of emergency that makes it impractical and unsafe to conduct these meetings in person. In order for us to move forward, we need a motion that would simply state, under the current state of emergency, it's impractical or unsafe for the group to assemble in a single location, and that the purpose of this meeting is to discuss or transact the business necessary to continue with this subcommittee and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities under Executive Order 71. As the co-chair, I would like to enter that motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I'm sorry, and if you could just state your name.
Emily Steinhuber.
Thanks, Emily. All right. Also fun and incredibly cumbersome. We're going to do a roll call vote. Well, hold on just one second. Let me grab my roster. John Bateman.
I'm here.
Thank you. And I'm assuming you're supporting the motion that's on the floor.
I'm sorry, present, and I support the motion.
Thank you. And we could do the roll call in this motion to continue with the meeting simultaneously. So I think Kate Gibson, we may have Jennifer Morgan here from GWRC.
Present, and I support the motion.
Thank you. Dr. Troy Hartley.
Present, and aye.
Louis Lawrence.
Here, yes.
Thank you. Stephen Murray.
Yes.
George Marquez. Georgie, excuse me.
Sure is Georgie. Present and yes.
Emily Steinhilber.
Present and yes.
Dr. Robert Weiss.
Present and yes.
Thank you. And Mr. Greg Grutendorst.
My apologies. It's just getting off another meeting. So I'm present, but I don't know what I would be saying yes to.
Okay, Greg, we were just actually approving a motion to allow this group to continue meeting virtually due to the pandemic.
Yes.
I will mark you as present since you weren't here, and advantage to hear the motion. So, did I miss anybody? I think I've got my roster complete. Okay, fantastic. So we've accomplished opening of the meeting and the roll call simultaneously. Thank you all for participating. What I'd like to do is just welcome a new member, actually two. I think Jennifer Morgan with GWRC was here with us as an observer. I think she's been formally advanced to first string from her organization. So we welcome Jennifer. And then also Greg Grutendorst, who's with the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission. Greg, I would like to welcome you to the group.
Thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yes. We've got some special guests. I believe Admiral Phillips has joined us today. Is that correct?
I'm here.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you. And Admiral Phillips, did you have some guests here from Dewberry that you'd just like to perhaps introduce and let us know who's present?
I do, or at least I did. I think they're still on the call.
Okay.
And my signal is bad, so I've got my video off. But
okay.
Brian Batten was here a minute ago. I hope he's still here. He is. Yes,
I'm still
I see
here.
He's been moved over into the participants list. So thank you, Brian. We were fortunate to be able to announce the award of our RFP 866 last week. Dewberry and their team were selected, and so they are we're having our tomorrow afternoon, but they will be a presence now at all of our technical advisory committee meetings and subcommittee meetings as they start moving forward here with the RFP and contract outcomes. So thank you, Brian, for attending this afternoon, and we know we'll get to know you and the rest of your team. Many of you on the call know because they've done quite a bit in the Commonwealth. Those who have not, you will get to know them, and we're happy to have them with us. Thank you.
Fantastic. As we did in our last meeting, we didn't really elect a permanent secretary. I think the group agreed that they'd like this task to perhaps be rotated amongst the members. And John and I are getting ready to move into a portion of the agenda where speaking and taking minutes will be a little bit difficult. Do we have a volunteer who might be interested in supporting us in this area, this meeting? Don't be shy. I'll have to voluntold someone.
This is Troy Hartley. I will take my turn. I'll take my bullet this time.
Thank you, Troy. And we will note that you've done your civic duty. So thank you very much for volunteering for that. My opinion about meeting minutes is keep it fairly simple. If there was an action or a decision made by the body, let's make sure we just record who made the first and who made the motion, who seconded the motion, and I don't need a lot of details about discussion. I believe this is being recorded as well. So we've got a good record of this. I would like to see if John Bateman has anything to share with us, any kind of update about TAC activity, but we've also got the Admiral here with us. So anything notable that would be relevant for the subcommittee's work?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I would say the most notable thing is we finally have our contractor, Dewberry, and very excited to have them on board. Our planning district has done some work with Dewberry in the past in hazard mitigation planning space. So we think they bring a wealth of experience, and we're glad to have them. As far as the last TAC meeting, I mean, most of you were there, but most of the updates, most of the time for the meeting was given for updates from the individual subcommittees. And I know we spent a good amount of time talking about project identification and evaluation. And so there were some good components of that conversation I think came out of that. But that's really the biggest news of the TAC is that we have a contractor now. Anne can correct me if I'm wrong, if there's anything from that meeting that I might be missing.
I know that was it.
John, nope. Great. The other thing I would add is we were hoping to have our contractor on board by then, and we did not. So for our next TAC meeting, which we think, and you guys are hearing this first, will be either the 16th afternoon, 6 or 23rd of April, and I'll be sending out a poll here shortly once I confirm with Terry Strickler one more detail on that. But that'll be tentatively the next TAC meeting so that we can have all back here from Dewberry for the first time. And in the meantime, the subcommittees will be meeting Dewberry as we go forward. We have like I said, we have our first meeting with them tomorrow afternoon, and then once we have that completed, we'll be rolling out how they will be working with the subcommittees. So, thank you.
Thank you for that. What we'd like to discuss next is this subcommittee's charter. And I'm a big believer it's important that everybody on the team kind of know what direction we're supposed to be moving, and everyone can reflect a little bit on how they might be able to contribute to those activities and our big goal, which I think has been fairly clearly articulated. I did get some feedback from Troy, our secretary, on some changes he would propose to the charter. So I would ask if it's appropriate, I'd like to share that document with this group so we can kind of discuss and perhaps approve that charter. So I think I can just hit the share button. Is that correct? I'm going to try it.
Hit share and then select what screen you want to share.
Thanks. I have too many screens open. Okay. All right, can folks see my screen?
Sure can, Sarah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. So what we have here is the charter document that John and I sent you guys out a few weeks ago. And I appreciate those who had opportunity to review it. This charter really talks about this subcommittee's role, and this is the Aligning Economic Development Subcommittee, and our role in supporting the TAC and the development of the Master Plan for Coastal Resilience. The second paragraph restates some of the objectives, but I would like you to see some suggested changes that were made by one of our members. Central in the paragraph 2, as it relates to economic development, the plan should identify how resilience and adaptation presents economic development opportunities and maintains attractiveness of Virginia's coastal communities to people and businesses. And so that was one recommended change. There is a note here about the timeline, just a reminder. We are all on track to try to get this done by the end of the calendar year, and that this committee has to report its monthly progress to the TAC. In bold and underlined here is the big task for this subcommittee. And we have been asked to recommend a process by which public and private economic development activity in coastal Virginia, including transportation and other infrastructure projects, can be aligned with the principles and goals of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan. And there's a reference there. I hope everyone has had a chance to review at least the executive summary of that planning framework. I found it incredibly helpful. And then what we did here was basically just restated the guiding principles and the framework goals from that master planning framework document. So this is not original art. This is taken from that document. Under our definition of economic development, the discussion last time spoke about this two dimensions, I guess, to economic development. One being business development, efforts that help retain, grow, attract, and form new businesses. And then product development, which are policies and investments that will affect the environment in which a firm will conduct business, and can act as incentives or drivers or disincentives for business development, and also similarly policies and investment that would remove barriers to business growth. So I'll stop there because I think that was an item of discussion, and I'll just open it up to the subcommittee members if they feel comfortable with those two, I guess, dimensions. And I think it's important because John and I have talked a little bit about a strategy to develop this framework, and really having some concurrence and understanding around this definition will be important to that. Hearing none, I'm seeing some nods. That's encouraging. I'll keep going. Okay. We also acknowledge this duality and opportunity, right? And Troy has taken some liberties and edits, which I think are very good, and really, I think, better position this as the opportunity that it is. And I'll just read it. The subcommittee acknowledges that coastal communities remain economically viable and attractive places to live when they effectively advance resilience and adapt to climate change. And resilience and adaptation strategies, technologies, products, and services present a new industry cluster that leverages the unique physical and intellectual assets of coastal Virginia. And Troy, if you'd like to comment about your recommended changes, we'd love to hear that too.
Sure. I'm not went into the words of my intent, but basically is try and frame it in a positive light, the opportunity that exists here, and less as a threat.
Thank you. And do any other members have comments, or perhaps they had some changes that didn't make it all the way to our desks?
Sarah, I just can I comment about something? You just scrolled down from it. I'm sorry. Didn't
Sure.
unmute fast enough. Under the definitions of economic development, it says business development efforts that help retain, grow, attract, and form new businesses. To me, that reads a little confusing. I would change that to efforts that help retain and grow existing businesses and attract and form new businesses.
Okay, I think that's great. And Georgie, let me make sure I capture that right.
Yeah,
Retain and grow existing businesses.
right. And then comma, and attract and form new businesses.
I think,
Right.
yeah, I agree. I think that that sentence needed another word or two. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Okay, thanks.
Any other comments, observations?
I think it looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the definitions. And when we have our discussions, we can build out how we envision those two opportunities presenting themselves.
Thank you, Sarah and John for concisely bringing together our last discussion into this. And I think Troy and Georgie's comments are great.
Sarah, this is Louis. I'd like to see somewhere in the document some recognition of the importance of financing. The term that I've been circulating around is financial justice. That it makes it really complicated in this space if you're looking for the public sector to be facilitating investment in this area. If poorer or less capitalized local governments don't have the resources to be able to set programs up or to deal with the reimbursement that state agencies require to make money flow,
Right.
then it's really difficult for the government side to be in that economic development space. And then the inverse of that would be the complications of private sector providers trying to enter the economic development space, and what they are wanting, their widget that they want to bring to market is not going to be traditionally recognized by your everyday financing banks in the community. That you will get this does not compute. I hear and I read what you were putting on paper, but there's no way we're going to finance that business model. So that there has to be some more clarity brought into that space of the importance of making sure that money flows, because without that, nothing will move.
Right. So Louis, do you think that would fit under this product development category? And could we spin this out and maybe add this kind of idea of access to capital?
Yeah, that is a good space to put it. That access to capital is going to fall on both sides of the ledger, whether it's private or government. Both are going to struggle with that same set of problems.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I don't know that under business development here, we've really said what efforts are, but I think for folks that have been in this space, they understand access to capital, especially for new business formation or facilitating expansion. That's kind of one of those secret ingredients. And I think in this product development, when we talk about investments, again, if you felt it was important to be more specific, we could certainly add such as access to capital or including access to capital. And I just toss it out to the rest of the committee.
I think this falls under any discussions that we would have about equity. Because Louis right to point out that some areas are going to have more access to capital, therefore more economic development opportunities. It's just like some are going to have more resilience activity and therefore have more access to capital.
Mhm. This is a democracy. So if you guys feel at this point we need to put it in this charter, which I think by definition is supposed to be kind of broad, and then when we get to kind of discussions about this development of this framework, right, which is this committee's charge, I think that we could tie financing in both for public sector and private sector in our framework discussion. I think it's really important that we think about who administers those resources, because again, this idea of a framework for alignment. So identifying the players in those spaces might be something, you know, as we move forward that we want to think a little bit about.
So I do think Louis makes a really good point. The only question, I guess, is where it goes.
Yeah.
Louis, you're thinking that it needs to be in the charter to like kind of ensure that it gets sufficiently addressed in the course of our work?
Yes. You know, it just needs to show up so that it can't become a surprise later on. I know that for the work that we do, that is an ever-present barrier. You know, is trying to figure out how do we cash flow, how do we finance. Our local banks don't even understand the space, and so it is a real and ever-present problem that is going to, every community is going to be faced with it at some level.
Yes, sir. I kind of feel like it's almost so foundational that if we leave it out, we kind of may be, you know, missing something really important.
Okay.
But certainly understand others may have a different point of view, but I have to say I really agree with Louis here.
Yeah, I agree with Stephen too, that we need to have that up front, that this subcommittee is going to, that this subcommittee recognizes that inequities exist in access to capital.
Sarah and Louis, under the framework goals, there's a bullet point about establishment of a financing strategy. The second bullet, maybe we put a sub bullet under that to talk about specifically this access to capital in terms of public and private sector.
Yeah, I like that idea of it being under the framework goals.
So just to remember, these were in that master planning framework. So yeah, these were extracted, and I should have given appropriate attribution. I don't want us to get too deep into editing that section. Just my recommendation, but I do think under this definition of economic development, we could just say that the subcommittee feels strongly that access to capital for both public and private sector players in the space needs to be considered. Would that be appropriate?
That makes sense to me. Louis, what do you think?
Yeah, that's a good space, but it's also the mechanics of how that capital flows. And Sarah, you all will understand this because you administer a lot of grants to local governments and downstream players. And pretty much the majority of all Commonwealth grant programs are on a reimbursement schedule, meaning the downstream subrecipient has got to have a handful of receipts that they have paid before the money flows.
Sure.
So it's more than just making sure that it's capitalized, because the state could capitalize programs, but if your subrecipient isn't capitalized at a way that they can pay that handful of receipts, nothing moves. So it's looking at how it's capitalized, but it's also looking at how the flow for reimbursement works. If you're on the private side, well, I guess it could be private or public side. It's on both sides, depending on where that money ultimately goes. Because if you've got a government entity that is financing something for the private sector, we can't pay the private sector. to move to the next stage. So
Yeah.
it's really linked
Yeah.
together.
Does it make sense then, in addition to the sentence that Sarah just added, that down under product development in the parentheses where there's those examples of physical, regulatory, tax, workforce, there's something about grant making or public financing? That's another example.
Or Louis, instead of even thinking about it in terms of the definition of economic development for the purposes of this committee, what if it was looked at as kind of that last section as another opportunity to increase access to capital for these purposes? Would that be more all-encompassing?
It's again, it is understanding the space of how the money flows through the system.
Right.
That's the barrier. I mean, the state could capitalize a fund at $44 million, but if you can't make the money flow through the system correctly, only those that are rich, the rich, urbanized municipal areas that have the ability to move money are going to be able to do things that the poorer jurisdictions are not going to be able to do because they're not set up to be able to move money through the system.
Right. Yeah. And Louis, maybe if I could just expand on your thought, it's a problem. And at DHCD, we have reimbursement based grants, which means that Louis has to spend his money first and he has to document that he spent his money on a project. And so this issue of cash flow is a problem in some of our grant making. What I would suggest, and it is a real issue, particularly with some of our smaller localities, to really be able to take advantage of some of these programs. Maybe we acknowledge it here where I've placed it, but I think that in terms of making any recommendations to the TAC, I think that exploring this issue and getting some foundational data around how pervasive a problem it is would probably be helpful in guiding the effort. So how do you guys feel about that?
I like that, but I'm thinking, so we have definitions and then we have the two opportunities. This kind of fits in the category of an impediment, not an opportunity. So maybe we need to have a section in addition to opportunities that lists some of the challenges that we're going to be addressing. And I'm thinking about Stephen's comment that says this is foundational, and it is. So if these opportunities are foundational, this is equally foundational, but it's not an opportunity. It's an impediment, potential impediment.
Yeah, it's definitely a barrier. There's no question about that.
And are there any other barriers in addition to that? I mean, workforce and access to capital seem like the two big ones. Stephen, your thought?
On, you're saying on barriers?
Yes.
Yeah, I definitely agree with those two. I think also, assuming I'm following your general thought, there's just kind of, risk management is a big factor when we think about coastal resilience, right? There's a lot of companies and project types that are very sensitive to any kind of natural disaster risk, and coastal areas tend to get penalized. To the extent that we could be a leader on this topic and essentially have in place the policies and the financing framework for those to give businesses, confidence or more confidence, it may actually mean, more economic opportunity, more jobs, more capital investment in those areas. So that's definitely one of the things that also comes to mind for me.
Yeah, those are opportunities that you can provide to offset the challenges, right?
Right.
I'd like to get in there too, the regulatory space. This area where we're talking about trying to combat flooding is the most highly regulated area in the Commonwealth. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. It is just a fact. And anytime that you have extremely complex regulatory fabric, that adds uncertainty and risk in the economic development world. And that's a costly risk. I mean, it's going to be hard to convince companies that need to produce widgets of some type to deploy those widgets in that space if they can't get it permitted at the end of the day.
And if I might just restate, I've added a couple of words to our product development because I think a lot of what we're talking about are those policies and investments. We do mention regulatory here, so policies and investments that affect the environment, including the physical, regulatory. I added finance, tax, workforce, etc., in which a firm will conduct business, act as incentives and drivers for business development, comma, that remove barriers to business growth, comma, and mitigate risk. Are folks, am I capturing the conversation?
I think so, Sarah.
Okay.
Works for me.
Okay. I don't want us to get too twisted around this. It's kind of a, it's one of those, I want this to get us all moving in the right direction. There's going to be a lot of work that happens outside the framework of this charter, but I think the most important thing that we all need to understand is again, our task, which is to recommend a process by which economic development activity in coastal Virginia can be aligned with the principles and goals of this master plan. So that's the task at hand, is to recommend a process. And so I just want us to keep that in mind. I know it's easy to jump right to kind of programs, but I want you to think about a tool, a process that leaders in the Commonwealth could use to kind of evaluate the degree to which a economic development effort is aligned with the goals of this plan. All right. So I would like to see if there is, do you guys feel that this is an important enough document that we should act on it as a subcommittee and endorse the charter? Or would you guys like this to be more of a working document?
Working document sounds good.
Agreed.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Greg. I will clean this up and circulate it to everyone again. I find these things helpful sometimes if you get lost in the woods, and it's just a nice touchstone to the work. So we'll go back and revisit it again. John and I talked a couple of weeks ago about, kind of what's next. And I know something that we all discussed at the last meeting was who are our stakeholders? And so, to that end, myself and some other members of the DHCD team had been working on developing a stakeholder list. And I'd like to just talk to you a little bit about it and get your input and see if this idea has any wings. So basically what we discussed was this kind of construct for stakeholders, right? We've got state, we've got regional, we've got local, right? And then we've got this great group of other that includes some of our university partners that are working to advance interests in this space. We've got organizations like Virginia Sea Grant and RISE, right, that are not our typical, government category, but just such important players. And so we have, with VDP's help, thank you, Stephen, for extending your list, we've developed that list. So right now it includes all the PDCs in the study area. I mean, we've got a point of contact. The regional economic development groups, point of contact, and all of the localities, a person who's exclusively responsible for economic development, or in some of our more rural counties has broader responsibilities, but is the point on the spear for economic development. And then we've been working on a list of state agency stakeholders or resources. And as you would imagine, we were even surprised, like, let's think about resiliency and let's just think about economic development in coastal Virginia and the programs that are really working to make a difference there. And the list is pretty long. Right now, we've got about 20 individuals just on the state list. Obviously, all of our planning district commissions, we've got 21. Our regional economic development groups, there's 8 of them existing in this coastal region. And then, of course, all of the counties, cities, and towns in the study area, which is 38. Okay, so we've got this growing list. So one idea that we had is an attempt to develop this framework. Perhaps it would be helpful for us to do kind of a base level survey of these folks and just to test their awareness to the guiding principles and the framework goals in the resiliency master plan. We thought about doing an electronic survey, testing for response, collating that data, and letting that be foundational, a bit of data for us to consider when developing the process by which we are going to improve alignment, right, of all of those efforts with the principles and goals of the plan. So just open discussion, good idea, bad idea.
I think it's a great idea. Sarah, perhaps we could start off with having a spreadsheet list of stakeholders and maybe have a discussion right now about what types of questions you would put on such a survey.
I guess I just have a question. If we're asking what people's awareness is of the plan, how does that really help us?
So one of my ideas is, the first way to get folks aligned to your idea is there's got to be awareness, right? I don't know that, in terms of expectations about a regional economic development group or even a local economic development effort, really trying to, line up with some of the goals of this broader state level plan. So, and Greg, I would love your opinion about this. Would it be value added? Is it safe to assume that everybody knows what the principles and goals laid out or proposed to be laid out in the master plan are?
Yeah, I guess I'd imagine, if you're going to contact planning district commissions or economic development organizations, you're going to get this sent to somebody who is aware, and they'll say that they're aware of it, and maybe that lets them know that this is going on. And to me, when I'm looking at who do we really want to be aware of this, I guess the input that I would be really interested in hearing from down the road is really businesses, specific businesses, rather than economic development organizations, PDCs, and the like. So if we wanted to, I love the idea of, to let people know this is going on, it's good to first engage with them and ask the question. I completely agree. I guess I would just look at it. It would be fantastic if we could get a list of businesses that we could engage with, who are in, sensitive areas, and maybe then we would get much clearer and more direct feedback on what is beneficial, what is useful, what is helpful, rather than kind of having that muted through economic developers and PDCs. So it's just my thought.
I'm inclined to, I see where Greg's going with this. I'm inclined to agree with him. I would say, like, the Northern Neck has an economic development partnership, and we work very closely with all the key industries in the Northern Neck. So I think we would have a very good general idea of the challenges that those businesses face. But we would likely get specific input directly from them, and that would be highly valued. So when we're thinking about what stakeholders in economic development institutions we want to include as stakeholders, we want those with their ear to the ground, so to speak.
So I think that poses a larger question to the group here, because the way that John just laid that out, is the focus here to talk with existing businesses that are already in the Middle Peninsula, that are not specifically resiliency oriented, and finding out what's troubling their business machinery from being able to grow? Or are you all saying we want to reach out to businesses that specialize in this resiliency space and to find out from them what do they need to grow a footprint within the Commonwealth?
I think it's an and, not an or.
Well, I don't know. That's why I'm posing the question, because you've got different rails that you're going down here.
Yeah, and I'll go back to kind of the task that this committee was charged to do and how I kind of think about it. So, our goal is to recommend a process by which economic development activity, which is why I mentioned all of those stakeholders, because they're responsible for different levels and types of economic development activity, right, can be aligned with the principles and goals of the plan. So my idea is we got to find everybody in the economic development boat, okay? Sorry about my coastal reference here. And see if we can get all of their oars in the water and rowing to some degree in the same direction as the master plan, okay? So I don't think it's about contacting businesses per se, and I would ask Admiral Phillips to tell me if I'm wrong, but really testing the water to say, we've got all of these economic development activities. Are they developed and being executed in a way that is supportive of the principles and goals of the Coastal Resilience Master Plan?
That's more or less the way I had looked at it.
I think that question, I think Ann probably should weigh in if she's still here, because Katie's Bakery that's located in the floodplain, that's not a transformative business in the resiliency space. Is it important to local governments? All jobs are important to local government, but is having a business that comes in that creates a new industry cluster that helps the Commonwealth deal with this problem is of a much larger economic impact, because it's bringing in new jobs, new money. And so it's this age-old question, and Stephen can talk ad nauseum about the differences between those two approaches, but they're really critical differences, and they make a lot. They make a big difference in how you shape this. So you're talking induced, indirect, basic, non-basic. What space are we in here for resiliency?
Yeah, and I was just thinking maybe there's a way to do this through a balance. I mean, I definitely think it's valuable to hear directly from businesses, but for the most part, they're going to understand their individual business situation the best, not necessarily others that we might be seeking to attract, to the region. So I don't know, Sarah, if there's a way we could kind of think about each of these as voices that we might want to hear from.
And they might, in a way, be phased, just thinking through the timeline that we have to recommend this process that Sarah keeps trying to corral us around. And then maybe we look to aligning these questions for businesses as we roll out the related Go Virginia grant that I know a few of us are on this committee presenting as a next step.
So Sarah, this is Ann Phillips. I think my thoughts on this are similar to what both Emily and Stephen are both saying, which is there will be different groups, and Louis as well, and you might start with survey for one targeted in one area and learn from that another area that you might want to expand into. And we have the simultaneous Go Virginia effort going on, which is also working with the business community. And,
Mhm.
and so we may learn things from each of those that help focus or describe what maybe the next step should be,
Yeah, so
or
my
where
thought
more
was,
information could be sought.
thank you, Ann. And my thought was if you start at the top, start with the top and work your way down. So if you start with the state programs around economic development and then move to regional and local programs that are focused on economic development, and then from there you would move into the individual businesses. But I still do think it's that you can kind of walk and chew gum, that you can do both. You can look at existing businesses that aren't really operating in the resilient space to make sure that they're more resilient, but to a lesser extent from identifying businesses that would operate in the resilient space that would be critical to success.
So I've started a workbook, and right now I've got it on Drive, which I know because we're not in the all under the same system, I can't share with you necessarily, but I would like some help in rounding this list off. I've got a couple folks on the DHCD team that have kind of taken it thus far, but I would ask if there's anybody on the subcommittee that would like to maybe take a tab and make sure that we've got a comprehensive a list as possible.
I mean, I'm happy to look at it. My thought would be, Stephen, would you be willing to look at it?
And Sarah, can you just clarify what the assignment would be?
Sure. And Stephen, your staff has already contributed to it so greatly. I mean, you basically filled out the local and regional contacts. So I think we all need to look at it to make sure that things aren't missing. I think we just have to be careful that in our review, we're not inadvertently holding a meeting. But what I can do is send it to everybody. I'll just BCC the team. And if you'd like to send back ideas or additions or thoughts, then we can do that. It's just difficult for us to collaborate with in a live document in a committee meeting of this type.
Sure, that makes
That's a much
sense.
better idea.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So I would like, and I'm feeling Emily might be interested in helping us take this next step and getting the survey instrument ready.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Emily. Because I think we wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say we could follow up on the details of how I can support that.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And we will, of course, share this with the group. I just want to make sure we continue kind of at a pace, so we'll have something to report out to the TAC at their next meeting, and that we're making a little bit of progress each month. So thank you, Emily, and everyone for agreeing to contribute there.
Sarah, I have a question.
Please.
I hope this doesn't sound naive, but I keep going back to what you keep going back, and is the task of the subcommittee. Okay.
Sorry.
I know, but I think you're right. It's like, I just don't want us to get so caught up in like everything that could be done in economic development that we lose track of the fact that we're recommending a process. Now, maybe if we focus on, okay, is this process one that will be presented? Who is this process going to be presented to? And is it to guide, people who are, all those people that we defined above in, in or below in the group of who is involved in economic development, everything from, the businesses, and then is it to provide a document to inform that? And then what is the ultimate destination of the document, I guess, or of the process.
So Georgie, my understanding is that this committee is to recommend a process to the TAC.
Right,
And
okay.
at the end game is to improve alignment of economic development efforts to the plan principles and goals, right? So you get this kind of, kind of link and leveraged effect.
Right, so then we're providing something that will be used by the TAC to then take it one step further. So I think we keep trying to go to the end and skipping the fact that we're putting together a process that's going to be submitted to the TAC for then the TAC to do something with.
Thank you. Yes, that's my understanding of the task at hand, is we are to recommend a framework.
Right.
And yep.
Okay, yeah, because I think we're getting caught up in trying to take it to the very end, and that's not our job, if I'm
Right.
understanding it correctly.
Sarah, this is Jennifer. Are we supposed to be recommending actions that are based off the initial actions in the coastal framework master plan, like those goals and actions, how to implement them?
No, that's not my understanding. That
Okay.
we're to recommend a framework for alignment. So pick, and we'll use Stephen as an example because we got the state's preeminent economic development. So I would ask Stephen of his team, pick a program, right, that VDP is administering. And I would ask them, are you considering these principles in your program design or implementation, right? And is your activity aligned to support one or more of the framework goals laid out in the plan? Now, Stephen's team would answer me yes or no. And this is what I'm thinking in those categories. I'm sure it would be all yes. And so that baseline understanding would go, okay, we surveyed the kind of our universe, our defined universe of economic development partners. And we think that 50% of the activity is already well aligned and 50% is not. And so the framework for alignment would be around improving, right? So we can improve the likelihood that the overall goals of the plan and the resiliency efforts in Virginia would be successful, because everybody would kind of be doing it with their own resources in their own domain, a small part to contribute.
Very well explained. Thank you. That's kind of how I looked at it, Sarah.
Does that resonate with folks?
Yes.
Are you thinking, Sarah, that because I see value in what you laid out, depending on if you're sending it to the state agencies that provide programmatic financing and permitting in areas that are interfacing with flooding issues. And that gets to really, how well is your agency prepared to handle requests that at the end of that request result in creating of jobs, capital investment, and tax revenue. And if that's the direction you're going in, I think that has value, because I sense that the majority of state agencies that are in that space right now, but are not in that space for resiliency reasons, will not be able to answer those questions in the affirmative.
But that's good to know, right, Louis?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good to know, because
yes.
that gets to, is the Commonwealth, are different agencies of the Commonwealth prepared to be able to adequately respond to the challenge at hand? Because if they're not,
I would say, Louis, not just state agencies, but regional and local efforts and organizations as well. And, you know, how do you improve alignment? I mean, Greg and I had this discussion the other day, right? There's carrots and sticks, right? So, you know, I think we'll learn through this process how close we are. And then the group could make some recommendations on, again, this framework, right? And I'm thinking about, I mean, you could make it as simple as, you know, a self-assessment tool for every economic developer. Am I doing my work in a way that is true to these principles and goals, right? Is my program design and execution consistent? But it could be recommendations about carrots, you know, carrots and sticks. But that's up, I think, to this committee. And I think Dewberry will be able to help guide us once they get deeper into this project on what would be the most value added activity for the committee after we identify this stakeholder group, which I think, to be fair, and really kudos to Lee Hutchison and Tracy Munyon at DHCD, I think we've got about probably 80% of the stakeholder list done.
Yeah, so I think when you get on down to the level of those that do the economic development work locally, like local chambers, you're probably going to find less alignment, and that's where you're going to find less alignment, right? That would be my guess. That's my hypothesis.
Yeah, and I've got them under the influencers tab. But they are important. I mean, we know in many coastal communities, I mean, I know in Hampton Roads, the chambers are really starting to become a big part of this conversation. So I do think that's a stakeholder group, you know, while they don't administer economic development programs themselves, they are an important conduit, I think, for information to their members and to policymakers, quite frankly, just because of their, you know, influence that they garner because of their membership.
And it's important to note, and Louis will back me up on this, that a lot of local governments don't have a dedicated economic development person. They may not even have a regional organization that they can tap into. So in those situations, they're just kind of flying by the seat of their pants, so to speak.
That's the carrot and stick relationship that Sarah's talking about. If you want to see change at the local level, you give them a big carrot.
Or
Right.
a stick, or a stick, Louis, or a great big stick.
Or a great big stick, either way.
I gotta give Louis a hard time. But yeah, so that's kind of how I've been thinking through this. I think it's a doable task for the committee. I don't think we have to evaluate every economic development effort. And I think that a baseline survey so that we could say, well, you know, the current state is X, our, you know, desired future state is Y, and here's a framework to improve the alignment. Or to recognize the alignment that's already occurring. I think I'm thinking about those things. Okay, so we've got agreement on the list, which I'm going to circulate, and everybody's going to look at and contribute to. Emily's going to help me design some survey instruments, which we'll test with this audience to see if we're getting there. And we'd also like Admiral Phillips, who is still with us, we'd like to test that with you and maybe talk with Brian a little bit too, so we don't get too far out ahead of the broader effort, okay? And you may have, yeah, you've probably got a good stakeholder list, at least within the state construct as well. And we're at time. We've got two more things that we need to do today, and one would just be open up the floor for public comments. And it looks like Katie has said that there were not any public comments requested to be made today. I'd like to bump the item framework development timeline to our next meeting. But I do think it's important that we think about a series of tasks leading up to, and we probably need to do that now in consultation with the consultant that's been selected to make sure our activity is syncing with some of the other activity that's occurring. So with folks' permission, I'd like to just bump that to our next meeting.
Works for me.
That's fine, as long as we take a deep dive into the overall timeline and kind of plan it out, because it's a short period of time.
It's a very short period of time, so we got to be making little bits of progress every month. We also need, and I apologize, we won't be able to do this if they were not circulated with the agenda. Katie, did you send the meeting minutes out to everybody?
I did not send them out. They are on our website.
Okay, so let's defer approving the meeting minutes from our last meeting until our next meeting, if that's okay. I did not go out to the website and grab them.
I think, Sarah, I think we weren't being required to approve meeting minutes.
Okay,
Yeah, that's correct.
okay. Well, I take that back then. Just take a minute and look at the recording of our meeting and make sure that it accurately reflects, particularly if you were quoted. No, we shouldn't have any quotes.
If you see a typo, keep it to yourself.
Yeah. And, continue to invite people to be a part of this discussion. I mean, this is a really important effort. We are going to be pulling in, I believe, at least one additional member from VDOT. They administer some funds that are really used to support economic development, and those funds can and are used in coastal communities. So I think that would be a good, perhaps, addition when we talk about transportation, right? And some of the challenges that are occurring because of sea level rise and flooding. Is there anything else that anybody wants to share? Anybody have a bit of good news or anything they'd like to celebrate before we adjourn?
Good job, Sarah.
I celebrate the choosing of a contractor, but no, I'd like to take the time to quickly thank Troy for taking minutes during this meeting, and thank Georgie for keeping us on track with what our real task is. We do need to be regrounded every once in a while, so that's good.
Good. Okay, well, with that, we will conclude this meeting. Thank you, everybody, for participating, and keep an eye on your inbox because we will be sending some things to get your reaction to.
Sarah,
Okay.
we need to entertain a motion to adjourn.
My apologies, please.
So moved.
I second. John Bateman.
Thank you. And then do we need to do a roll call vote to call this meeting to conclusion?
I would suggest everyone unmute and we just get the ayes and the nays.
Okay.
Hi.
Everybody.
Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Any nays? So adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everybody, have a great day.